There's a park that still exists today in Denver that hosted like the national championships in the 1930s. I ride my bike and walk and drive my car by it every day. There's a myriad of people in Denver. There's people that fly fish in Denver after reading that book, I was like, oh my God, I could go and cast a rod in the same place that Goodwin Granger cast a rod. That's pretty cool to me.
That was Ross White dropping a little fly fishing history on us today. Bamboo, bags, and DLD today on the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today.
Hey, how you doing today? If you want to head over to our local fly shop and see who we have listed today, that's wetflyswing.com/fly shop. And you can find out and support a great local shop before you get started. Before we get started, let's hear from our sponsors. The Fly Fishing Film Tour is back. It's back, baby. Don't miss this year's 2022 F3T as it returns to theaters near you for another season on the water. Full of lots of super action, rod bending action, for a matter of fact. Unforgettable storytelling, lots of stuff here this year, including a big chunk on conservation partners. And as always, F3T is the show to hit up this year. Please head over to wetflyswing.com/F3T to find a show near you. That's wetflyswing.com/F3T. We are also presented today by Dette Flies. Established in 1928, Dette Flies is the oldest family-run fly shop in the country, now in their 94th year. 94th, almost 100 years. That is amazing. Dette has always had the same mission, serving the fly fishing community with the finest products and services. Every fly they sell is either tied in-house or by a handful of select tires. Please head over right now to wetflyswing.com/Dette to grab your flies now. That's wetflyswing.com/Dette, DETTE. You support this podcast and Dette by clicking through that link right now. Ross White from Deli Fresh Design takes us to the history road. We're going on a history trip today. This is this is not your history lesson like back in class, the boring history lesson. This is fly fishing history. Ross has a passion for it, and today he digs into that passion. I call him out a couple times. I call him out on his bamboo podcast, which I want to see him get into. And but man, all sorts of good stuff in this one. It's kind of a catch-up episode. Bamboo. We talk about packs, some of the stuff he has going, how he has the recycled Sims waders as part of his material line. But we're all over. This is one of those random ones that's all over the place. Hope you enjoy it. So without further ado, here is Ross White. Let's do this. How's it going, Ross?
It's going well. How are you?
Good. Thanks for circling back around here. I'm looking back on episode 79, and was when you were on last, and that was over a few years. Right? We're almost up to 300 episodes now, so it's been a while. What have you been up to for the last 220 episodes?
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel honored that I was in double digits instead of digits. So I'm honored. I don't know, a lot's happened. Sort of, in some ways, the last 2 years feel like nothing's happened, and then amazingly, everything's happened. But I'm still living in Denver, and luckily this past summer, I was able to go out to the Catskills again. I was out there in 2019. Depending on when we last talked, it might have been before or after, I'm not sure, but yeah, I've been still working on bags, still sort of evolving the products, and still making them one at a time myself, and planning to sort of, as we go forward, kind of make things in batches, and then limited release batches. So if people are interested in the bag, then you can always reach out, and the more people reach out about a particular item, the more likely I'm going to make it. Opposed to something that not a lot of people are reaching out about. So that's where I'm at. Sort of deep diving more into the vintage fly fishing tackle, not just reels and rods.
Oh yeah,
all the
that's right,
and things like that I can potentially see as ways I can incorporate into my own product.
Yeah, and that's all and we're going to dig into that a little bit on the vintage stuff and the bamboo stuff. We recently had a classic fly fishing episode with a guy who deals with all classic gear, and he talked a little bit about classic and vintage and some of that. And it sounds like you can actually get your hands on that episode, for under $1,000, pretty far under $1,000. You get a pretty nice rod and reel bamboo setup out there, vintage, or well, I guess more classic.
Yeah, who did you speak with?
That was, I think it was classic fly tackle. It was a Ward Tonsfeldt.
Okay. I'm sure I've been to his website, but like the biggest misconception I think that people find, regardless of rods, is that I think that in terms of accessibility, or people hear like, oh, $2,000, $3,000 for a fly rod.
Yeah.
And I think that what probably drives the market in terms of maybe the overall idea of like, finding a rod in terms of vintage stuff and trying to get something under $1,000 is a little bit of a hard thing to do, is because of the fact that you sort of like, if you make the analogy that like a Horks in Ibbotson or a South Bend or a Montague, 100 years ago, those rods were, they were the equivalent of a $150 Echo rod, but 100 years ago, the best material for making a rod was bamboo.
Yeah.
And so I think that people don't realize that, they were never considered the best. They were considered affordable, much the same way that an Echo is today. I mean, there are some very nice made Echo rods. They're a little bit more expensive, but for your money, hard to beat an Echo base. And in the same way that an Echo base cost $150, 100 years ago, if you adjust for inflation, I mean, a Montague base rod was $1.50, and if you adjust for inflation, it's about the same.
That's funny. Yeah, $1.50.
I think that if you do that kind of inflation calculation, I think the one thing that has changed is that if you want to do it in the U.S., then the cost of labor is what you're paying for.
Oh, right.
It costs more money to pay for someone to make a bag in the U.S. than it does in China, or a rod.
And I love, and that's what with you, you're running the ship over there at Deli Fresh Design, and you make some bags that are, like you say, they're kind of like almost like a throwback to a little vintage style, a little newer vintage. Maybe describe that again, so somebody who wasn't listening back in '79. Describe what you have going at Deli Fresh Design. What is your superpower over there? What do you do?
Well, the one thing that we do that we probably weren't doing back at '79 is that we pretty much exclusively only make the bulk of our bags in terms of actual, percentage of materials that go into the bags today out of recycled materials.
Oh, nice.
Or repurposed materials. So, I would say about 80% of a bag is going to be entirely repurposed and recycled materials. And that's predominantly using Sims waders. So we partner with Sims as well as some fly shops who donate waders to us in order to keep that wader waste out of the overall supply chain and out of landfills. So we do that with them. And then the other thing we do for a lot of the liners of our bags is use sailcloth. And then we also do rock climbing rope a retired rope for bags. But I'm always evolving the ideas I have in my head in terms of bags. But one thing that I have been doing lately is sort of seeing, not making things in a vacuum, but also trying to make everything, looking back to what people were doing and finding answers and finding vintage bags that might inspire me or give me ideas on how to make something today, opposed to maybe 20 years ago or 30 years ago or 100 years ago. There are all ways I can improve upon the designs and sort of take a step back into the fly fishing history, which is a rich history, and then kind of evolve from there. But oftentimes there, the ways in which fly fishermen have been, been fished today opposed to 100 years ago is very different. One challenge is that 100 years ago, we probably were only carrying one or two fly boxes, or, half a dozen flies, or, the cost of a single hook was much more expensive. And so today, we carry several, either from one to, up to a dozen or 2 dozen fly boxes at any given moment. So how do you take a very simple bag that was made for a salmon fisherman with one box, and predominantly was using that bag to take his catch home. So those questions, or those storage challenges are different, but sort of seeing how we can do that, or where do I need my fly boxes to be accessible? Is it in a backpack? Where does my net need to be? Do I always need a net? Those kind of challenges. Where do I hang my nippers, my hemostats, my tippet? All things that you might have had one spool, in a different era. You might have been using gut leaders. You might have been using silk gut leaders. Who knows? You could have been using one spool of 3X.
Right. So what were they using back then for bags? Like back, say, I mean, you had the creel, but that's not what we're talking about, right? You're talking about.
Well, it's interesting. So I think that so people have this idea, and it was sort of posed recently on the Orvis Fly Fishing podcast, that the idea of a vest is sort of so old school, and it's something that is a mid-century design. And I think at some point or another, Lee Wulff either created what we know as the modern vest, or popularized the vest. He was in some way or form helped propel the vest to the forefront, in terms of what people from maybe the 50s to now considered a bag, or the required tackle for being on a river. But prior to that, and if you look back in catalogs and articles and advertisements, people were more exclusively using something like a creel. Either it was a creel to hold, maybe just their catch, and maybe there are some examples that I've seen that have leather pouches for holding, that fly box, that one fly box that you need. And you might keep your extra gut leader in a pocket or two, and that's all you had. You might have used your pocket knife to cut off the fly, tie in another one. It's pretty simple.
Right.
But so, I mean, from that sort of creel, and then you'll see that, and oftentimes you'll see it, Hardy goes through phases where they'll make some bags, and other people will make bags, not unlike like a Duluth pack, where it's tan canvas and leather. So out of the creel, that it might have a couple of front pockets, and then a major pocket called a bladder for holding your catch, and that kind of thing. And so those kind of things were evolving into, multiple fold out pockets, and bigger things, so I can keep more, like I can fold out the bag, fold the bag down from like a computer sized bag out to like, a 30-inch or 40-inch salmon, that kind of thing. And then those kind of evolved. And then eventually, because of the popularization of the vest, those kind of faded out. I think Hardy over the years has gone through phases where they've stopped and then started making bags in that vein, and they've always been kind of considered popular in terms of collecting, and in terms of vintage, collectibles. And then, but then it's interesting too now. So, sort of in the last 10 years, I would say that the vest is sort of, if you want to say we've de-evolved, or we've evolved in using bags again.
Yeah, we're back to bags. Are vests, now tell me this, Ross, are vests are totally out? I mean, does anybody wear a vest anymore? And talk about Colorado, because you guys are like the trout hub, one of the trout hubs of the country. Is anybody wearing a vest out there?
I don't see that many people wearing vests in Colorado anymore, but I was, so like on the East Coast in the summer, and there's more sort of in the vein of like traditional Catskill fishermen. People do wear the vests, and one thing I did do this summer was a collaboration with Dette Flies, which is the oldest fly shop in America, and I did collaborate with them on a sort of classic inspired vest that we did for them. And it's something that is sort of a simple pared down vest, and you might see it and say, oh, that's looks like this company's stuff, but overall was something that we decided to do together as a collaboration.
What's that vest called again? What is that, the Delaware?
No, that's it was a strap vest we did exclusively through Dette Flies. So if you
okay,
did
gotcha.
taking a look at that, you could go to their website at detteflies.com.
Yeah.
And then in terms of my own products, though, I just tend to design them a little bit more around the sort of the more contemporary stuff, but also sort of thinking in ways, oftentimes too, sort of what I saw as an opportunity or a niche to fulfill when I started the company was how do I make something more simple or pared down so I can spend more time fishing. And that's sort of something that always kind of rings true. It's like, well, I don't like all this busy stuff, or what if I get rid of this so that I can only have this? And does that make it easier, or does it make it harder? Whenever I'm making a product, I'm going out on the river and it's like, do I like this? Don't I like this? Does it solve the problem I want it to solve? Yes, no, it's too cumbersome. I carry too much. It's heavy. Those are all things that eventually add up to, kind of evolving the product forward. And obviously when I started the company, I sort of had to like start from scratch where it's like, there's a bag that I like, but it's, also too complicated for my sewing skills at this moment. And then, 4 or 5 years later of coming back, regularly sewing and making bags, I've evolved stuff it can improve upon other previous ideas that I've had.
So you have a sling pack, right? Talk about just quickly about your bags, and what do you wear? Like if you're going trout fishing, what are you wearing?
Well, predominantly it depends. So if I'm going, and I'll say that I like, I've been for dry fly fishing on the East Coast. I was wearing a bag that I've been making for a while, which is the Neversink Chestpack. I find that I like having usually someone who likes a lot of tippet, so I like having it in the front. It's accessible. I don't have to move something back to forward. Everything's kind of where I need it to be. The one I've been using is something that I've been kind of like slowly germinating into potentially evolving towards in terms of the actual sort of like a prototype that I've been sort of thinking about in terms of like slightly different from what you see in the current iteration of the Delaware or the Delaware and the Beaver or Neversink on the website. But essentially, it's a chest pack that has a net sleeve on the back or a D-ring, so you can keep a long-handled net or a short-handled net right where you need it. And then on the front, you have one major pocket for boxes, buy boxes, and then in the front you have a drop-down sort of platform or like a sort of like a station where you can work while you're on the river for getting your tippet or your extra flies that are they're switching out flies. And then you also have the ability to like store extra leaders and like indicators. And
is that bag made out of? Is all the bags on your website, are they all made out of Simms waders or the nets?
For the most part, I mean, like I said, I think we. So some of the times we will work with we'll get donations from other people. So I obviously would happy to take that stuff. And the cool thing is that for certain products, one of the things that I do, and I very selectively will choose certain parts of a pair of waders. Pretty much the legs from like the knee down are going to be very stiff and durable. And then so for certain parts of a bag, that's going to be more beneficial. And then in terms of the way like a Simms pair of waders is articulated, there might only be so much I can use for this particular bag style. Opposed to the upper part, or this model of Simms waders has only a certain amount of lightweight material that is better for like maybe the top zippered part opposed to the bottom, which is going to see more wear. So that's kind of how I use that. And then so like sometimes I've in the past I made like protective sleeves for like the cover like a nice rod tube or like your standard 4-piece 9-foot rod tube that you want to take through an airport, but you don't want to like necessarily carry around an aluminum tube that's going to slide out of this or that or get banged, and you don't want to harm it, but you want to take it through an airport when there isn't a pandemic. But that kind of thing. So those kind of things, it's like, it's really just a lightweight thing that goes over this, but it doesn't necessarily need
to
be durable and thick. So those are all considerations that I take in when I'm making a bag. Or it even is like, I want to have this sort of form of rigidity, so that there's structure in like a chest pack, or say the Beaverkill pack, which is sort of considered our fanny pack. So it's like, do I want it to be super bulky or a little bit lightweight, so it's more versatile, so that if you wanted to use it for like, a travel multi-purpose kind of bag where you're going on like a fishing trip to Belize, but you also want a fanny pack for kind of walking around with your camera on like that one off day or that evening. You have a bag that is versatile and can be used for multiple things. So I'd take all those things into consideration. We do sometimes, like on certain bigger bags, or like where it makes sense, I do tend to use like a ripstop, or like a virgin or new ripstop, sort of for like bigger things, like big backpacks, where like it needs to be lighter, or like but overall pretty much everything has a liner of sailcloth. And then obviously too, using up existing inventory of materials, where like I've bought ripstop, but I want to keep using it because I don't want to like wait or sit on it, or I don't want to discard it. I'd like to keep using it. Moving forward, or like, I'd say the majority of our bags, or exclusively all of the bags, or core fly fishing bags, with the exceptions of maybe the backpack. Sometimes, or like even all of the internal pockets on the backpack might be lined with ripstop, but the internal pack or pockets are going to be made out of sailcloth. And the other thing that I like doing, and I think is important to do, is tell the story of the material that I'm using. So I try to highlight existing seams on a pair of waders. Ironically, probably the most the coolest, sort of the most interesting sort of seam is right at the crotch, where like there is a lot of material coming together, and it is kind of fun to use that because it shows the story.
How do you use that? What products are you using that on?
It depends. Sometimes it's like a side panel, or like the side panel flaps for the straps, or like there's like a padded some padded pad, or there's padded like straps, and then padded side panels for the the Neversink pack. And I might want to highlight, in a cool way that like someone can be like, oh, well, that's so cool, like that's an original seam. Or I have those waders, so I know exactly where that is on my waders.
Yeah.
Those things I like to do. And then like what made me think about it is that especially on like the sailcloth, with those packs, or like if I'm going to do a pocket on the inside of your backpack, I don't want to just be like a flat piece of sailcloth. I mean, sometimes it does end up being that way, but typically on every pack or accessory, or whether it's a fly wallet or a beer koozie or a backpack, and like a sail, or one of our fishing bags, like the Beaverkill or the Neversink, I try to, at least on sometimes, like they all have like internal pockets. So a lot of times the way sails are made, you'll see like zigzag stitches, and that's sort of how the actual sail was made. So if you think about a ship, it could be like a 50 to 100 foot long sail. But fabric's only the fabric or that's used for sails only comes in maybe 60 inches in width. So how do you make a 100-foot long sail, or that a sail that needs to be 50 feet wide by 100 feet long? And so a lot of those times those sails are put together, or almost always put together, with zigzag stitches. And so I try to incorporate those in the pockets or in unique ways, so that when someone opens one of our bags, they're like, oh my God, that's so cool. There's an original zigzag seam from a ship sail. And it's like, not only has, like the outer part of one of our bags been used to, help someone, or not only is it made out of waders where someone was actually fishing in it, but then if you look on the inside of our bag and see one of those original zigzag stitches, you can say, I wonder where in the world that piece of material has been, or that propelled someone across the world, or
that's right,
in Cancun or in the Gulf of Mexico or something like that.
Today's show is presented by Stonefly Nets. Stonefly Nets starts their design process by selecting wood and handle based on a number of factors. This is a custom project, a custom operation, and you can actually see, you can track some of this. We're doing a little giveaway for one of these nets that you could track right now. If you go to wetflyswing.com/giveaway and check that out right now. Ethan has been producing some great stuff there. He's been doing some cool partnerships over the last year. For Ethan, he always draws it back to his family like a lot of us do, and he remembers kind of that bamboo rod from his grandmother and, that 3-weight and the feeling that he got, when he kind of cast it and had that in his hand. Same thing for this net. When I grab my Stonefly net, I know I'm going to always have this thing. I'm going to be passing it down for my kids for generations, and it's not just some tool. It's more than that. This is a unique custom net. So support Stonefly, a great company and a great net, at wetflyswing.com/stonefly, and you can get your custom net. Check out the process right now. wetflyswing.com/stonefly, STONEFLY. You support this podcast by checking out and clicking through that link right now. Okay, let's get back to the show. And you're still sewing all these things, right? All these bags. How many bags are you sewing? Do you just sit down and just do? I mean, how many do you do a day? Is this all? This is kind of all you?
Well, it's currently all me, and overall, I feel like eventually I would see it being the kind of thing where it potentially having it be still an in-house business where I have a couple of other people helping me to sew. But overall, I'd like to keep it in-house, and it's a way to keep our costs down and then our supply chain short. Obviously, like now in a pandemic, a lot of times if you look on someone's website, you might say, why is this sold out, or I can't get it for another 6 months? It's because there's either a material shortage or a supply chain issue, or things are, there's things that aren't available because the borders are hard to get things through. Like recently, just this week, I tried to send out an order to someone in Australia, and it hadn't occurred to me, but I was trying to use the USPS, and the USPS has suspended all shipments to Australia.
Oh, really?
And I was like, I didn't know that. And then so I had to ship it to them UPS. And
UPS would cost you about $300, right?
Well, it was like not quite that much, but it was still expensive. But luckily the end customer was willing to wait and let me ship it for an extra cost. And eventually I just like it's not worth charging upcharging them for the shipping. I'd rather just get it to them. They're already willing to pay a lot in shipping, and they've been patient, so I might as well just get it to them.
That's pretty cool. So how do you track down? I was just going to ask you about that. Your customers. How did you find, a person in Australia, and then who is your target customer for the most part? Who's buying your stuff?
Well, I was going to say, sort of what we were sort of hinting at it before about supply chain issues and stuff like that is a strong case for someone to maybe, if you're like, well, if I can't get that brand new reel, then maybe I could, dive into getting, maybe a vintage reel or something that's already in existence.
Exactly.
Checking that out. Or, I've thought about buying a used carbon fiber rod, and I've bought them, but maybe I can, I've always wanted a bamboo rod or a vintage fiberglass rod. That sounds interesting to me. So I can, that's something, if you're tired of waiting, then you could potentially go in that route. But I would say a lot of our customers are people that are, understand what we're doing in terms of the story, and they like the recycled materials. They understand the premium of something that's, on some ways, we make them in batches. Like most of the time, the batch we, like I said earlier, I've sort of gone to the point where I will make stuff in batches, and then allow people to, based on what people want. So that's kind of how we find our customers and things like that. But a lot of it's on Instagram and then word of mouth. And I was on the East Coast and for the summer, and people see our stuff at Dette, and I meet people on the river. The one thing I haven't done in the last couple of years is done the fly shows, and but sometimes that's a way in which we can get people interested or show people our product. But a lot of times I think it's how do we show people our product through Instagram, or how do we tell the story that I've just told you. So
yep,
yeah,
that's it. Yeah, no, it's cool. It's a cool story.
I mean, it's amazing to me. So I think I met you through Elliot Adler, who
Oh yeah,
does the Drake cast from time to time, and then
yep.
and I can't tell you the number of times we advertised probably 3 or 4 years ago, and then through his podcast, and we haven't advertised with his podcast in 3 or 4 years, and it's amazing. Sometimes I'll read comments. People will buy our product. They're like, "Hey, I listened to the." Or it's like, oh, I just listened to the Drake cast that came out 5 years ago, or I just listened to Wet Fly Swing, and the people will meet me and I'm like, oh, I remember, or like, yeah, I heard about that, that kind of stuff. So
yeah, it works. It's similar on the podcast. The podcast is the same way, man. It's been total word of mouth for the whole, basically the whole thing. And I hear the same thing. I heard from somebody the other day that just listened to the back catalog, and he said, yeah, man, I just made a purchase from, 2018 or whatever it was. So
oh, nice.
Yeah. So it definitely, it's not your hockey stick growth, right? It's not like you're putting but it still works.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing that is a benefit is, I do have a full-time job, so in some ways the benefit of that is that during the pandemic, I was able to absorb some of the costs of that because I wasn't relying on DFD for money, and so I can allow the company to continue in its current form. But I wasn't, it wasn't just abruptly to like a complete dead stop, which is what happened, not just in the fly fishing world, but other places too, where all of a sudden people don't have jobs and companies have to fold because they don't know what to do, or their money dried up and they were only running on 3 months of lead time, and
Right.
3 months into the pandemic everything's dried up. And I think companies now too, with people, like I said, with supply chain issues, I think it's an ever evolving problem and people are struggling.
Yeah, and it's probably not going to get well. It seems like this sort of stuff is going to continue on, right? I mean, this is not going to be the only time.
Yeah, I think it's also like kind of like poked holes in the consumerism of everything and made people realize we are living on borrowed time in terms of environmental issues. And I mean, I think in some ways too, like if someone in the fly fishing world is like, I'm waiting for that, that new pair of waders, but I can't find it. But also I'm also interested in a new rod or a new reel. There's ways in which you can scratch that itch or provide some joy from buying vintage stuff.
Hey, I got a question for you, Ross. This is on, I got drilled a while, where was it? It was probably a month ago by, I never get into politics much here, but I said something, I guess that was a little, a podcast I listened to. But I watched a movie recently. Have you seen that movie, Don't Look Up?
I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. Well, I watched it, and it's kind of on a similar, it's obviously not about the pandemic, but it's just a play on the fact that, I mean, just kind of politics, right? And the world and the shit that's happening out there, right? And like, we got to kind of be aware. And I mean, I think that's kind of where you're coming from, though. I mean, you're hardcore on this, right? You're making the point. You're right along with Patagonia, maybe. I mean, how do you see that with like Patagonia, with what they're doing and with what you do? Do you just see you kind of a very similar thing, just a much bigger company, or how does that look to you?
Well, I don't know. Patagonia is, they may have changed it a couple of years ago. Their sort of like their company slogan was we're in the business of saving the planet.
Yeah.
And on some ways you can interpret that as, oh, they're in the business of saving the world, but they're also a consumer-based product company and they also manufacture overseas.
Yeah.
So it's like, on one hand, are they really doing what they're planning out to do? But on the other hand, it's like, if they're pumping their profit into environmental issues.
Exactly.
I mean, it's blurry. I mean, it's the same thing with Orvis. I think that they do a lot of good, but on the other hand, they really want you to buy that brand new fly rod. They want you to buy that Helios 3, even though,
you already have a good one.
You already have a Helios 1 and 2, and you also have all the brand new Sage rods, or the last 10 variations of Sage. So, anybody who's, I think in the fly fishing world too, I think that there is like this monetary, exclusivity that people find where they're like, I can't keep up. And I think that I would say to them then, or I would make a strong case for anybody in that situation. Well, there's always eBay. There's always really cool reels you can buy on eBay. A lot of them are under $100. There's 150 years worth of old reels on eBay, and a lot of them are junk, but a lot of them are pretty good that you can catch fish with, and they're probably $25. I mean, though, I think the interesting thing that people don't realize is a Pflueger Medalist was the bread and butter for reel.
Yeah, great reel.
From salmon to steelhead to tarpon, people caught big fish on Medalists, and people look like they're garbage now. I mean, in the summer of 2020, I was doing a lot of carp fishing and trying to use probably a $25 Pflueger Medalist or a Pflueger Gem, which is a earlier variation.
Oh yeah, does that have a drag on it?
It doesn't. I think it.
Oh, no drag at all.
That have the same twist, pressure on the. I think it's even more. Well, so the Medalist actually has a drag system.
Yeah, it has that little well, it used to be ivory. The original reels were ivory, I think, right? They eventually became plastic, but they were something else when they started.
Yeah, they might have been. Some of them may have been, but I don't know. But Pflueger Medalists probably not. The early Hardy reels, some really early Hardy Perfects and stuff, do have the tension or the drag tension on an early Medalist. Early Perfects, I think, may have been brass. There might be some examples of bone or ivory, but while the handles are on a really early Perfect might be and people, they kind of, if you look at the handle on a contemporary Perfect or a Bouglé, they use it's ivoroid. It looks like ivory and it has the lines in it, but it's one of those things where it's unfortunately an elephant had to die for that 100 years ago. It's not a good thing, but it didn't fall apart like a plastic thing did. And bones, any kind of perloid or bones and things like that can be kind of have longevity opposed to plastics.
Oh right, yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So let's take it to the gear. So we got, I mentioned the Ward Tonsfeldt. It was episode, I'll put a link in the show notes. It's episode 276. He took us on a guide to classic bamboo and reels and stuff. And you also, now tell me about that. So we talked a while back. How's the podcast? Because you talked about maybe starting up a bamboo rod podcast. How's that looking?
Well, right now I'm stretched thin with a day job and a side job. And currently I'm kind of at the point, and I've been, as a result of spending time in the Catskills last summer and my interest in bamboo, I've become involved with the Catskill Fly Fishing Museum and potentially seeing it as something that I could work with them on, where it's they pay for the production and I just get to be the one that interviews them, and then they get the content eventually. I still would love to do it. I think that I've interviewed Dave Dozer and a friend of mine, Chuck Goulian, who makes barreled rods here in Denver, and but I don't really see a reason to potentially. There's not enough of an incentive if I can't start putting it out there to start interviewing people. But it's not that I don't want to start interviewing people. It's just that I feel like I have to get some sort of traction with a source of whether it's an editor or someone who's going to own the content and provides the pays for the support. Just basically even if at the end of the day I don't get paid for it, but I basically just am the guy who lines up the interviews and hits play or hits record. Then ultimately, I'd love to be able to pass it on, because selfishly, these are all people that I want to listen or talk to. And I've met Hoagy Carmichael, who sort of wrote the how-to book on how to make bamboo fly rods, and his book took off. It was the right time, the right place, and he is someone who a lot of people were inspired by reading his book, or by Everett Garrison, who he wrote the book on. Which is, I think it's called The Master's Guide to Making Bamboo Fly Rods. and it's a step-by-step book. So if anybody was interested in like where to start, if they're like, oh, I met a guy who makes bamboo fly rods and I'd like to do that myself, but I don't know if he's willing to teach me. And it's like, well, if you can get your hands on a copy of that book, it's a place to start, or we'll answer some of your questions and what goes into making it. But a lot of people ask just questions that Hoagy's been on April Vokey's podcast, and he's talked about his relationship with Everett Garrison, but some people may or may not know that he also made bamboo rods after Garrison passed, before the book was published. But one thing I met him over the summer, and I was like, oh, I'd love to get the answer from him. Is like, you wrote this book and you made a few fly rods with Everett. What made you want to make your own rods, and how are they different from Everett Garrison's rods? Is it just that you making your version of the Garrison rod, or did you evolve your tapers and things like that? And the esoteric sort of there's overall arching stories that people have and are interesting to hear from people, yeah. But the nitty gritty stuff of I know you interviewed what's his name from Mike Clark or Bob Clark.
No, from let's see, which one? What was the subject?
Riverwatch bamboo fly rods.
Oh yeah. Bob. Yep, totally.
Bob Clay.
Yeah, Bob Clay. Yep, exactly.
Yeah, Bob Clay. He answered some interesting questions, but some of and then I think he was on. He's friends with April they're both from the same area of BC. And but she asked some of those questions, and when she interviewed both of those people, but overall she was asking questions about their stories, and I'm like, no, wait, I just want to know that one specific question.
Exactly.
And there's a documentary a couple of years ago, or it came out. It was produced, I think, in 2016, and then it was released on Vimeo, which it's called Chasing the Taper, and it's a really well produced movie, and it got me through the early days of the pandemic, and it's a great sort of preliminary look into the people that are sort of the top maybe 10 bamboo fly rod makers, predominantly East Coast guys, but it features Per Brandon and Marc Aroner and a few other guys that are extremely well known, and Dana Gray, and people whose rods are highly collectible, and people that work for Leonard, and we're good friends with Tom Maxwell, who was one of the co-founders Tom Maxwell, which was one of the co-founders with Tom Dorsey of Thomas & Thomas.
Oh, okay.
People that knew the people that Hiram Leonard trained. They worked for Leonard, and so that's 150 years worth of fly fishing
gotcha.
Rod technology that people are talking about, or that those people experienced.
Do you mostly love the history? Is that what you really feed off of? Is the history of not just bamboo? Is bamboo your main thing, or is it history of all fly fishing products?
I think it's all of it. I think that the thing that I would like to see doing with this podcast. The other thing is that I think in terms of what we've been talking a little bit today about, is that there's a lack of accessibility in terms of people who are interested, or potentially interested in vintage fly fishing gear. They're like, well, I can never afford a bamboo rod. It's well, actually, that $800 or $900 brand new rod you bought, you can buy, it becomes it's sort of the diminishing returns, or exponentially every year that a rod's been fished, the more likely it's going to be broken. Or most bamboo has a limit to how long, as a natural material, how long it can be used. So, I mean, I think in some ways that the sort of the rods themselves, and then the people that make them, especially are the people that kind of hold the interest of the history, or the unwritten history of fly fishing, and that stuff I really find interesting.
Today's show is presented by Angler's Coffee. With more than 40 years of experience in coffee, the Anglers Coffee team roasts a full range of coffees with one goal in mind, delivering excellent coffee to every single angler. Responsibly sourced from farms using sustainable growing practices, you can rest easy knowing you're doing your part. Joe has it going over there. He's got some great partnerships. We actually had him on in a recent episode. If you check it out, a short little snippet episode, and Joe talks about what's new with them. They ship this stuff out in 48 hours, so you're getting the freshest roast delivered to your door. The Artist Series is really cool. An extra $1 goes to Casting for Recovery when you buy one of those bags, and this is a super cool design. They got a brook trout design. You got to check it out. The dry dropper, so much stuff. Joe is like, whenever I talk to this guy, man, he's got all sorts of stuff going on. It's hard to keep up with him, and it's amazing because it's good stuff. So I hope you have a chance to check out Anglers. If you're at the show, if you're at any of the shows this year, or depending on when this is coming out, a good chance to connect with them there. You can go right now to wetflyswing.com/anglers and check out some great coffee right now. That's wetflyswing.com/anglers, ANGLERS. Check it out. Support this podcast and a great coffee company by clicking through that link. Okay, let's get back to the show. So you like the nitty gritty, and I do too. I mean, that's the struggle on me, is that I'm not as, you are a lot more knowledgeable on some of this stuff, so it's helpful. But let's try to, I'm curious because
it's interesting, or like it ties it back to like the contemporary modern day is like, so a lot of people might be aware of the Golden Gate State fly casting ponds that are in San Francisco, or like in club and ponds.
Yeah, the Golden Gate Casting Club, right?
A lot of famous rod makers and R.L. Winston and E.C. Powell were people that were making rods in San Francisco, and like hollow built rods sort of evolved in that area with competitive casting. But one thing that people I didn't realize, and what sort of makes me that much more excited about my understanding and learning of fly fishing history, is that the Granger Company, which was founded in Colorado, I was reading something in the Granger book. There's a book that came out a number of years ago exclusively on Granger, and well, I didn't read all of the book. I was reading the sort of the preliminary building, or like germinations of building the company, and Granger was a competitive caster, and there's a park that still exists today in Denver that hosted like the national championships in the 1930s. I ride my bike and walk and drive my car by it every day. There's myriad of people in Denver. There's people that fly fish in Denver and I after reading that book, I was like, oh my God, I could go and cast a rod in the same place that Goodwin Granger cast a rod. That's pretty cool to me.
That is awesome.
Living history of the sport is what makes it more exciting to me.
That's cool. That's
really and there are also ways in which I can participate in the sport without actively just standing in a river casting a rod trying to catch fish.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. I mean, I think that's you're hitting on what makes you unique. I mean, your products are unique, and I'm curious. So out there, is there any other brands in the fly fishing space doing something similar to what you're doing? I mean, I know there's other people that are doing stuff, but it seems like you're really dialing into this really classic style, vintage. You got your own unique style. Are there others that are building their own products just like you are, sewing it up, or do you talk to many of them?
I haven't talked to him, but I there's a guy up in Fort Collins. It's called the Merger, I think. But he makes wax cotton and leather bags for fishing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a gap between I like these products, and it's a very specific thing.
What's the site? The site everybody makes their own stuff and sells it.
Etsy.
Yeah, Etsy, right? So it kind of gets to that, you got the one-off stuff, the Etsy stuff, which is a huge thing. I mean, I know people that are, they're doing whatever, but your thing really isn't an Etsy thing. I mean, you actually have, a company. It's just
I mean, they have a website. I mean, I think that and he makes. I've seen some of his products in some of the fly shops, and I'm like, oh, that's amazing. And
okay,
we work. He has a very limited. He makes 2 or 3 bags and some accessories, and not to say that I'm not doing the same thing in some ways, but I think when I started the company, and why I chose from the get-go to use more synthetic materials is that there's already sort of like a tried and true expectation currently within fishing. I don't want to be so far out there that I become like, I'm only exclusively this.
Right.
Whereas like, the majority of people, they're like, oh, I like that, but it still needs to be waterproof on some level.
Oh, right.
Or they're
water resistant.
intimidated by the idea that they'd have to reapply the wax after 20 years. So that kind of thing. And then in terms of like the design too, like I also felt like, well, I'd like that idea, or like if you look at a Vedavu bag, I was like, oh, I want to make something that is a little bit more in the middle of those two, where it's simple, it looks sort of classic, but it isn't as complicated or as technical as some other products. I mean, sometimes I'll see like a Patagonia bag or a fish pond bag, and I'm like, I'm sure that's a great product and it does the thing that it does for that person. But what I oftentimes look at design, and it's sort of like a function over form. It's like, how can I take away all of that stuff and make it even simpler, or convey all the things that bag does, but do it the way I could see it being more simplified in my head. So, I mean, it's, and it also just comes down to like, oh, I don't want to do that. I want to do this. Or I'm not that guy. I'm this guy. Or like,
you got your own style.
Otherwise, you're just copying someone.
Yeah, no, and it's cool. I think you gave me an idea. I think it'd be cool. It sounds like you're going to eventually do some sort of a podcast, but I'd love if you could help us out here, and maybe you could even help with this thing. But give me a top list, like maybe a top 10 list of, if you were to create this vintage mini podcast, say 10 episodes, tell me, like, what are the topics? If you had 10 episodes to do, only 10, you can only do 10, what would be the 10 episode topics?
Ooh, that'd be hard.
You got to have bamboo, right? You got to have one that's bamboo.
Yeah. Well, there's one guy, there's a few guys. I think I would choose Marc Aroner for my bamboo, because someone who's worked with Leonard and is currently making rods.
There you go.
And also extremely well respected. And I think that sort of like Per Brandon is considered, like just based on cost or something might people say like, oh, the creme de la creme. But in essence, like I would love to. Part of the reason why, like, I was sort of watched that Jason the Taper documentary and sort of reaffirmed why I wanted to interview all these guys is because, an hour and a half documentary where there's 10 people being interviewed. They got like the premium stuff, but like what I might find interesting or what might end up being in that podcast or in that that documentary that's like 15 minutes if you boil it down of like one-liners and I would rather sit down with someone from an hour to 2 hours or 3 hours. So there'd be that. I think there'd be a real person.
Yep.
I think it would probably be someone who's an expert on Bouglé or had some or not Bouglé, Bogdan, either like I could even see something that I could talk to Hoagy Carmichael, because he personally, when he's written about Hoagy Carmichael, or Hoagy's written about Stanley Bogdan and stuff, and reels would be interesting to talk about. Marc Aroner's son and Mark sell. If anybody's looking for premium vintage fly fishing gear, Spinoza Rods is their website.
Oh yeah, Spinoza.
Yeah, they have a ton of stuff, fantastic vintage fly fishing gear, and it'd be interesting to talk to them or Mark and Jonas about Bogdan's. Maybe that'd be a 1.5. I don't know.
So it sounds like it would be hard, and it would be, and when you say vintage, tell me again, vintage is what? The difference between classic and vintage, there is a difference, right?
I don't know if I know, like, there is like even in like between like, there's technical definitions between what's an antique and what's vintage.
Oh, right. Like 50 years or something.
Something like that.
I think what Ward Tonsfeldt said was, he said the difference is classic is gear that's what he sells mostly, is gear like people are using. It's like you're going to get it, and it could be a graphite rod from the 80s, but vintage, God, I'll have to remember on that episode what he said. He did make a big distinction there. I mean, vintage is essentially older.
Yeah, I'm not a collector, so I wouldn't say that I would. I would say that maybe his definition of classic was anything that someone, regardless of when it was made, it's still considered to be like really good or high quality
and usable.
Or usable, yeah.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, a vintage or like an antique bamboo fly rod. But then again, I mean, there's interesting things where it's like, you know, there are people that are like historians. There's his name's like the Gnome, and he's done the museum at some of the fly fishing shows where people can see the evolution of bamboo fly rod technology, and people that were contemporaries of Hiram Leonard, and you know, early examples of this, or the early examples of six-sided bamboo rods that were running in parallel. I don't know. There'd be like, I don't know the names of those people, but I think there'd be interesting people that I would like to talk about, of like what did it look like when you were a kid to go like fly fishing? I mean,
exactly.
You know, what was it, the kind of like, you know, like Joan Wulff, like, you know, never mind your overall arching story. Do you remember she's in her 90s, you know, when you were a kid, what were you using, or what was it like to use a gut leader? When did you stop using gut leaders because it was not any fun? Those kind of things that are enriching about the sport.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah. So,
well, maybe what I'll do is put together a little. We'll start with Marc Aroner or maybe Hoagy Carmichael. I'll put together an episode, and then maybe we can get you on as like a co-host, and you can come and have a bunch of questions that, you know, better questions that I could ask, and I'll let you lead the podcast. How's that sound?
Yeah, that would be cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Then we can focus then as we go. If it works out, if it's something that, like, you know, works for you or whatever, maybe we can think of a few more, and it could be kind of a vintage, you know, it's like a classic vintage mini podcast series. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then that'll help kick you off to your whatever your next, when you actually do your full podcast. Because I really love the history. You know, I do. It's just that my struggle is like you. I mean, you're more knowledgeable on this, so I think it would be helpful to have somebody help ask some better questions. I know with Bob Clay, that episode, I struggled a little bit, you know what I mean? Because I didn't know the subject quite as well as some. So I knew I struggled a little bit, but, you know, I did my best. And that's kind of, you know, for me, I look at this like sometimes I kick at, you know, sometimes I did an episode the other day with Will Blair.
There's like, you know, I can tell like, you know, someone like Bob Clay, it's like he has to explain sort of in some general form of how a rod is put together, or like a bamboo rod is,
you
know, the
basics.
Explanation of how you put it together. But sometimes it's nice to, like, you know, like I listened to a podcast where it's just like there's sort of a straight man, where it's a guy who it's called the Fretboard Journal magazine, and they yes, it's a very nice, anybody who's interested in vintage or like guitars, but they do a side podcast where they have an expert on, and he just like fields questions that people have about how to repair and like modify tube amplifiers. But you know, I've listened to it. I've dabbled in it, but I still can't tell you, you know, one side or the other from in a tube or in a tube amp. I'm like, I don't understand, but I still listen to the podcast. Like, I don't need that introduction of someone explaining to me what a tube amplifier does. On some level, like anything, you know, I mean, I'm hoping that if I did something like a podcast, it's something that these are just weirdly interesting people. Like I think that some people, they might find me fascinating, but I find these people fascinating, or like it's fascinating that anybody can make a living, or some semblance of a living making rods. I mean, I think that that's commendable, and so
I know
getting sort of into their heads about what they do would be, I find inspiring or interesting and enriching for the sport. So, you know, I don't necessarily feel like it's the kind of thing where like I don't want it to be like, oh, how do you make a rod every time, or like explain how to make a rod, that kind of thing.
Yeah. No, it's got to be interesting. I think it's got to be. Yeah, obviously, it's got to be.
You have zero interest in ever owning a bamboo fly rod, or, you know, making a bamboo fly rod. It's just people that are talking about fishing. Like as an example, like I talked to Marc over the summer, and I had a question about an old pain rod I saw out of like a antique swap meet or flea market, And I was like, oh, should have I bought it? I talked to him about that for about 10 minutes, and then quickly he evolved into talking about salmon fishing because he was excited about his trip coming up in October. And the next 30 minutes were him telling stories about salmon fishing,
which is amazing.
To some people would, that's all they'd care.
Atlantic salmon, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I know that's a bucket list fish for, I think, a lot of people for sure.
Well, the cool thing too is like with that is like I was listening to him about it, and he doesn't have a lot of disposable income like most people in the fly fishing industry, or like, you could say like people have the idea where it's like in order to go salmon fishing, or Atlantic salmon fishing, you'd have to spend 10 grand or 20 grand to go to Scotland, and it's like, well, actually, like our conversation was like basically a DIY version of how to go Atlantic salmon fishing. And it's more accessible than people think. So,
yeah, you down on the East Coast,
people have this idea of like it being, like very tweedy or like very inaccessible, but it's much in the same way that like you can go steelheading. It's just that it's a different system. Like you have to draw, like you have to apply for lotteries with like the provincial government in Canada or like the provincial East Coast governments to get certain number of days on a particular river, and it might be only this stretch. But then if you want to spend 10 grand, you can jump to the front of the line because you can go to some private club and do it there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I think I'm gonna have to hold you on that, and maybe if I can get one of these vintage, we'll get you back on it. How's that sound? You want to do that if we can put it together?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to do something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. That'd be fun. We recently did an episode with Tom McCoy, but we had the Art Flick TU, Michael, who I've been talking to quite a bit. He's become a friend of mine, and he co-hosted with me and asked some good questions about the Long Island, right? Which is an area I don't know very well, but they described it, and it's pretty cool. There's a lot of that northeast part of the country. Obviously, has tons of history. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I don't know. Have you talked to I know it was brought up in some of the podcasts about the Daddies. You should talk to Joe Fox.
Yeah.
No,
we're going to be definitely getting Joe on hopefully soon. I mean, that's the goal for sure.
If you want to get into like the minutia of like Catskill Fly,
I do. That's been a number one priority.
Hook technology and all that stuff. He's a extremely large dearth of information.
I've been waiting just to get Joe on, and that's kind of been the reason. But yeah, we'll get. I love to hear the Catskill story.
He's a busy man. Once you get him on the phone though, he's fun to talk to.
Okay. Well, as we take it out here, give us your 5. You mentioned a couple podcasts, but right now, what you're listening to, not your 5 favorites, but the last 5 podcasts you've listened to.
Oh man, I'm gonna have to look it up.
Yeah, let's check it out. Let's hear it. This is my Dave Jackson. Dave Jackson's a podcaster. This is his thing. He does sometimes. Is your top 5? Your last 5.
So the one I was talking about with the vintage tube amplifiers is called "The Truth About Vintage Amps" with Skip Simmons. Let's see. How Did This Get Made?
Oh, cool.
Which is about like terrible movies.
So it's all about terrible movies and how they got made.
They talk about like, sometimes it's just like awesomely bad movies where like, Roadhouse is a ridiculous movie, but they like Patrick Swayze's pants couldn't have gotten any like, poofier. Like they're just ridiculous pants. It's just really funny about where they talk about how like, because like a lot of times like Roadhouse, or at the end of it they're like, is this movie worth watching even though it's terrible? And it's like, absolutely, it's an awesomely bad movie, but you've got to watch it. Or it's like this made for TV Hallmark Christmas movie is just unwatchable, but it's all pretty great. And so I listened to that. What are the other ones? Listen to another interview-based podcast, not unlike what I would want to do. It's called Luthier on Luthier by the Fretboard Journal as well. But it's Michael Bashkin is a Fort Collins-based guitar maker. He interviews other guitar makers. So in some ways, that was the model I had. for the idea of interviewing rod makers. And then have you heard of Dead Eyes?
Dead Eyes?
Yeah.
I think I have. What's that about?
It's this guy. He's a comedian, and he the 90s, in like 1999, he got cast in Band of Brothers. And then right before the day before he was, or like on his way to like shoot it, or like his scene, he got fired. And supposedly it's because his like agent told him it was because Tom Hanks told them that he had dead eyes.
Oh, really?
Sort of this like deep dive, multi-season episode thing where he's interviewed other people that were like, the people that were on the show, or like the people that he could have been exchanging lines with, or that like sort of this sort of like amazing what if of like, if how would my life be if only I'd gotten actually in Band of Brothers. And then like the last episode he had Zach Braff on, and then like Adam Scott, and they were both people that interviewed or went to like the casting call for it but didn't get hired. Or didn't even make it through the first round, or like Seth Rogen got passed. It's amazing how the people that got like interviewed for it or went to the casting for it. Or
so it's all about that movie essentially, and the people.
That's mini series, yeah. And
wow.
So eventually, it's like, I think they alluded for the next episode he's going to talk to one of Tom Hanks' sons. Just like meeting like the snowball of like meeting other people and the podcast getting traction. Stuff like that. So
that's great.
Then let me see.
Yeah, what do you got? You got one more for us?
Yeah.
These are good. You got a lot of music, movies, so it sounds like you're really into that. That's a big part of what you love.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just interesting conversations. Prior to like really going deep into fly fishing, I was for a while contemplating being like a luthier and guitar maker, and at the same time I was like, oh, I'm fishing a lot. I'm probably better. Like, I can't play the guitar really. Don't know that many musicians. It's probably maybe a little bit more logical for me to become make bags and work in the fly fishing industry.
Yeah, that's right.
Not that I still don't like occasionally like contemplate the idea of making guitars and do it once in a while. But the other one that I like that I've been listening to is Paul Scheer has another podcast called Unspooled. In the first season, he went through with his co-host, Amy Nicholson. They did the entire AFI list, AFI top 100 movies of all time.
Oh, wow. Of all time.
It took them a couple of years to do that, which was really interesting.
So they just did their review, or how'd they do it? They reviewed the movies?
Well, they like watch the movie and then they talk about it. And Amy Nicholson is a movie critic, so they look through critical lens, and then also like, is it just like well acted, or just then Paul Scheer is like talking about movies all the time.
What was the number one? Do you remember what the top movie was?
Well, the first, I think on the top list, it's Citizen Kane. But then the cool thing now that they do is they do like these little mini series. Like they did like a Halloween like horror every year, and then
Friday the 13th.
Yeah, or like, is it really good, or is it all that they did like Freddy Krueger and
Freddy Krueger. That's almost a joke. That was scary when I was a kid, but it's a kind of a joke thing, really, isn't it? I mean, I don't know.
It was one of those things where I think it was like if you watch the original one, I haven't watched it. It's too scary for me, I think.
Oh, it's still too scary?
I don't know. I remember seeing like the end, and I was like, nah. Or like as a kid, I was like, no, I can't do that. Too much. But it's interesting to like. I don't feel like I have to watch every movie.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I hear you. Awesome. Well, thanks for all the time. Been good catching up with you, and glad to hear you're still going strong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Ross.
Okay. All right. I'll talk to you later.
All right. We'll see you later.
See ya.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
So there you go. Want to find all the show notes, all links, and everything else we covered today? Head over to wetflyswing.com/291. 291 will get you the good stuff. You can also head over to wetflyswing.com/flyshop to support a local fly shop right now. I would love to hear who your local fly shop is. If you get a chance, send me a DM, message, whatever on social media, wetflyswing, and just say, hey, enjoying the show. Whatever you want to, and let me know who your fly shop is. I'd love to give a shout out to a local fly shop. We're always trying to do that. where we can. I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to leave it at that for today. I appreciate you for supporting the show, and this is another bonus episode. This thing's coming out. When it came out, it was a bonus. This is like extra value. I think we might have had like 4 episodes drop this week, and I know 3 of them were big, full-length episodes. So I'm trying to over-deliver for you. If you have a show topic at any time, you can send me an email at dave@wetflyswing.com. Do that right now. Stop right now if you can. Dave, D-A-V-E, @wetflyswing.com. Super easy to do, and I appreciate it because I know that you are listening. And when I hear that people are listening, it helps me do even more. And you can even tell me if you have a content idea or a guest. Anything you want. Just want to hear from you. Whew. All right. It's cold in here, so I'm ready to get out here and get to some warmth of a nice bed. Bedtime. Here we go. Check in. See you on the river. See you online. See you when I see you.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.